So we learned a lot about work from home and how it can change the workplace. So we would like now to dive a little deeper. We invited our tutor, Susanne Mayer, who is an ex-BVN architect. She has been working in London. She worked in Australia. She worked in New York. She has been designing literally all asset classes, but focused on interior design for office in the last couple of years. So she wants to do a deep dive into the evolution of co-working environments. So how can we develop co-working places? And that is not only co-working spaces like we work, but places where people can collaborate in an office atmosphere. So how did that change the building, the quarter, and maybe even the city? So we had to cast this already. So this is like a little video. You can send over your question, but we cannot answer them directly. We go forward them to Susanne. We have some Q&A session also pre-recorded at the end. But again, if you have questions, just put them in the Q&A, and we will forward that to Susanne. So to our colleagues in marketing, Mats up for the little video that we prepared with Susanne Mayer on the evolution of co-working spaces now, please.
So, welcome. This is a pre-recorded session, and this pre-recorded session, I welcome Susanne Mayer. Susanne Mayer used to be architect with BVN and is responsible for workplace management. She has been doing that for many years and many interesting projects for work. That means office, but also for healthcare, for education, for residential. And she has also been lecturing for IREBS for the last few years. And she has contributed to a new book project that we are currently working on innovation and innovation management in real estate. So, Susanne, thank you very much that you are with us. You are discussing with us today your topic of choice, that is co-working, and how we will work in the future, and how that is in fact affected by infections.
Yes, exactly. Well, thanks very much, Tobias, for the invitation. I'm very excited to speak to you and discuss this topic with you. It's very close to my heart. It's a very emotional topic, as we all know. It concerns all of us every day, and we have all seen the changes in the recent years. So yes, I will probably start with a bit of a story, and I'll share my screen. So at BVN, which I've been with for 20 years, mostly in Australia and in New York and London. BVN is an Australian practice, but we have been focusing on other markets recently, and also just trying to understand where the differences lie and where we can learn from each other. But buildings, when you think about it a bit broadly, a bit more broadly, and especially in bigger cities, buildings need to be changing into from being just monocultures and just offices. They need to change into buildings as ecosystems. So this is broadly the topic that we have been lecturing at IREBS about as well. But what has happened during the lockdowns is something that was probably already there beforehand, but has really triggered the kind of quickness that it will change the workplace culture for the better forever. So presenteeism is not necessarily there anymore. Managers have realized that we need to change our behaviors in order to be there for our people and still manage them whilst they're away. We have less commute, which obviously also means we probably have less busy cities, and we need to think about new business models. Constantly on is definitely bad for our mental health. Mental health has been a huge topic over the last few years, not just in workplace, but also in schools and education. But the hybrid work world and the hybrid work needs to be reassessed and curated in order for everyone to have a better experience. And that also goes for learning from others and mentoring. So basically, the big reasons why people want to come to the office is different for every single person. Some people want to come to the office because they want to see people, and some people just need to get away from their family and be really concentrated and sit down. So the settings and the amenities and the offerings that we need to have are so varied, and it's not just for, you know, the beer tab that is for free on Friday and things like that. But one of the interesting things, this is something from Cushman and Wakefield and their research. One of the things that has been really clear is that the challenges of a hybrid work need to be curated in order for people to actually meet and bump into each other. So this is a research where they were looking at an organization of 100 people, and if employee A and employee B only come to the office 2 times a week, it means that the likelihood that they're going to see each other is only 12%. So a curation in order to let the same people come and meet, or different people come and meet, needs to be supported by some kind of a system and a process so that it's actually meaningful. And we've touched on it before, but one of the great things that has come out is that a work-life balance and our mental wellness is a big topic recently. And so one of the things that we're discussing, which is great that it's much more in our discussion right now, is our mental health. There's been lots of little projects about that as well. So it's called the new pandemic of loneliness. There's one thing in German, but also one of our clients, which is Fraser's Property, has just done a great screening, The Great Separation, which can be seen in Australia. So what we call the new normal, or what everybody normally calls the new normal, is actually not so normal anymore. It is actually the new different. And it's a great opportunity, and whilst it's a challenge as well, to rethink the whole building stack and the ecosystem. So there's not just one solution for everyone. I'm just going to go through a quick anecdote of this is quite an old diagram that we have, but what we mean by an ecosystem is that it becomes a building stack that can be for offices and for co-working, or even for residential and co-living or hotel offerings, that becomes so flexible that some spaces can get into each other and also be more adaptable over time so that it can be more usable in the future. And so that is what we call a resilient building ecosystem, and it allows for a community to grow. And that can be overlaid with any kind of apps or the curation of hospitality and events, but also technology and gyms and well-being, in order to really create a community that is there for their business. And I'm going to show a quick film now. This film was done before the lockdowns, but it's already summarizing everything that I've been talking about.
So, thanks a lot for this short introduction into your work and what you're doing. So you mentioned that in your presentation that it started before COVID, and COVID was more or less like the catalyst for the whole thing. So how much was already before, and how long would have taken it if there wouldn't have been a pandemic?
That's a very good question. I think it really depends on where you look at. So it is very different from every country. Obviously, all of the countries had very different lockdown periods and lockdown challenges in itself. But it really depends on, from an organizational point of view, where you've started. So if you were an organization that was already quite fluid and flexible with working patterns, then it probably didn't come to you as a big change and a big challenge. However, if you were, for example, in an industry where you're very bound to your office or to storage or to any kind of files, for example, I'm thinking about lawyers and law firms that have only that then realized that a lot of things need to be accessible from other places, and so it really depends on where you were on that scale beforehand, and obviously where you were in terms of your culture, your work culture. If you were quite a tight-knit community, if you knew each other very well before, because that means it was much easier to connect to each other via Teams and any other hybrid patterns. So it really depended on the situation, I think.
Yeah, so we are discussing today in this session a little bit more on office, not so much on residential. You mentioned that today it's merging and melting into each other, and all these different use cases are every day maybe discussing. So what are the haves and must-haves and necessities when you look at office buildings of the future? So how can we approach that?
I think, again, it's not just a one simple solution for every situation. It really depends on the location of the building and how much infrastructure is already around it. Obviously, you don't really need a coffee shop or a big boardroom in every single building if it's already around you in the vicinity. And I think one of the things that building owners are really grappling with is, can they maybe already build something within the vicinity or within the campus or within the building that can be used by multiple tenants? For example, a big auditorium or a big boardroom that is teched out with great cameras and things like that, and technical support, might be so much better to be used by multiple tenants rather than just one tenant that only uses it for maybe 1 hour a day. So this is something that the must-haves really need to depend on your own work styles and your own work culture. And one of the other things that has really come to the forefront is, after the lockdowns, when people came and returned to the office, it was really clear that if you need to understand what your people actually do each day. So really understanding what the work is, what the nature of the work is. Because it kind of it's not such a broad brushstroke anymore in terms of the individual tasks that everybody does, and that is something that lots of people have been doing with surveys, but even with just observing your people when they come together.
Well, I remember when we were in the beginning of the pandemic, there was the answer to everything was we come 3 days to office and 2 days we stay at home. So that should be the answer for everyone, all time, every company. And I felt that it cannot be right. I thought that this should be a management task to find out what the right answer is for which project, for which company, for which team. So let's assume there is a company that wants to have that answered and come to you and would like to have a workplace designed. What should they ask themselves to find out, to prepare a meeting with you? And how do you prepare a meeting with them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, obviously, I think one of the things that when you talk to users about a new project or a move or a new space, it really it is the first thing that a lot of people have in mind is fear, in terms of, oh, I'm going to get something is going to be taken away from me, or things are going to change. And us social human beings are not very good with change generally, but actually turning it around and making it clear that this is a really great opportunity to not only shape your own workspace and your own environment, and really think about new efficient processes and doing things differently in a better way, but also giving it more joy and meaning. But usually the bigger question lies behind it. When we normally start a project, we normally meet for a chat with the leadership team, and that might be people from HR, or that might be people from the CFO, or lots of different leadership people, in order to understand what keeps you up at night. Like, where can we use this opportunity to really change either the culture or your employment background, or what is your competitor doing? Are you seeing any kind of threats that might be coming in the next 10 years or so? So understanding. And lots of people are not maybe necessarily aware of it because it's written down on your website, nice and juicy. But really, what's happening underneath, or asking people that have recently left the company or have recently joined, is always a really good understanding. So the first initial talks are not about the actual space, or do you need an office, or where's the printer going to be. It's more about the bigger ideas of how can we use this opportunity, which it normally comes once in a lifetime for people. Where can we grapple this and really change this into an amazing. The space can definitely help to adapt anything, but it's not just the one thing. It is the culture that needs to be led from the top.
And do we need someone else? So the client, the tenant wants to change something. They're coming and set up this general meeting. So they're going there with you, and then you talk about cultural and about change. So do they need any third parties beyond your experience, and of course then the developers?
Yes, I mean, I think it's always great to have the developers or the building owner on board straight away. It needs to be a bit more of a symbiosis, a collective creativity, so to say, because at the end of the day, you can't really function and plan in an isolated mode. There might be other things happening in the building or with your neighbors, but then, of course, there is other consultants that might help you with. Storage used to be 10 years ago, used to be a big issue. So there were lots of storage consultants that could help you make your processes and your behaviors a bit more lean for things like that. So there's lots of consultants and experts out there that can help you on the way. I do think the most important ones are the building owners, or maybe the tenant advisors of the building, but also in general, just thinking about the wider future. It's also your neighbors and any kind of other people that you want to be part of this community in the future. Maybe the future students that might be there afterwards at all. And it needs to be curated, obviously, if there's too many people involved in a big project like that, it also can become quite messy. So somebody needs to keep it all tight and keep it all together and find an overview.
The pictures that these workplace managers and these architects usually show, they're so inspirational. They're always make me feel like, oh yeah, I want to work there. Is this only something for the new buildings, or is it only something for the best and most expensive areas? Or is there something like this can be multiplied really in the Eschborns and Niederrats and all these B locations in the city?
Yeah, ideally, absolutely. And I mean, the biggest thing, obviously now, and especially with the global climate crisis that we're going through, we don't necessarily need more buildings. This is something, me as an architect saying that, but the building stock that we have, obviously there is a lot of stuff in there that can't be used anymore from a very energetic or from a location point of view. But generally, we need to start thinking about adaptability much more in a much bigger sense, because there are so many buildings that can be used not just for an office, but again, this new change, the buildings will be there in maybe 50 or 100 years still. The use will change potentially every 10 years. And this is one of the things when we think about circularity, how can we think about a fit out or a wall or a partition in a much more usable way, that today it might be a hotel, but tomorrow it could be also a school or a kindergarten or a workspace. So things like that need to be much broader. The ideas and the concepts and the risks obviously need to be thought about in a much broader sense. Yes, adaptability and using our amazing building stock that we already have in a different way is the key.
Adaptability. I mean, I'm currently sitting in this almost 900-year-old monastery that was used for 700 years as a monastery and has been reused over the last 200 years multi times. So I think that is really one of the important things that needs to be done in many, many buildings. So do you have something like a perfect building that you would like to look at? Something like, I would like to work in this kind of buildings?
I mean, I think we've done everything. Our old Brisbane office used to be in an old bakery, so we still had the oven in there. I mean, there's obviously churches and very grand buildings, are obviously amazing because of the ceiling height and the light that comes through. At the end of the day, everybody has their different preference. It's more to do with the layer of history that is behind it, the patina that you can, rub off, that you can, that it's a meaningful space that you can then create and hopefully build up on previous things. We've done a library, which was an old hospital. So it really just depends on what's suitable. It's also, I mean, I'm not saying that every single building needs to be reused. It needs to make sense. It needs to make sense for that location. You can't really build an office building in the middle of nowhere if you can't get to it, or if there's no public transport or things like that. So it needs to be a holistic idea. But most of the existing buildings that I've seen, any kind of storage unit or old factory, is obviously an amazing challenge for any designer.
So it is about refurbishment. It's about reuse. It is also about mix, and we saw that in your slides too, that where these different uses are going into each other. Is there something like a perfect mix, or how do you arrive at a perfect mix?
I mean, there's not really a perfect mix. I don't think it's a lot to do with understanding what's already there. What I mentioned before in terms of the neighborhood, it's really talking to the developers and thinking about the long term, the future of the next 50 years. And, can the canteen become a school kitchen, or can it maybe become a restaurant at night? It's those kind of adaptability, not only from a physical sense, in order like what you're able to build, but also can a use maybe change over the time and over the day. So an auditorium that has big breakfast meetings in the morning, can that maybe become a cinema for the people that live around it at night? It obviously has a big security issue around it. You need to plan for that. You need to have fire regulations around it, all things like that, and this whole blend of, or the blurring the boundary between public and private, is something that I've seen in many other countries done really well, especially in Australia. But I don't know what Germany has to say to that. Maybe better than I, what it means over here.
When we come to this regulatory issue, that's a good point. I mean, what can we learn? What is, as you say, what does Australia do good, or what did you learn from the UK? What they're doing good? Not a law person, so I don't know the regulatories perfectly, but maybe you can give some examples where you think you should look at that, or you should copy these, or so is regulatory rather a help, or is it hell?
Yeah. That's a good one. I don't know. It's in Europe, I've found that the European Union is definitely at the forefront of any kind of regulations, which has definitely helped because it can't be done. There is such a long or a big kind of responsibility on all of us. So it's not just, the building owner or the tenants. It's also, the insurers that need to look at, can we ensure this? We can't just loosen up the fire regulation if people get hurt, or security regulations or things like that. However, it needs to be done in a much more simplistic way, I think. So one example from Australia is that the fire regulations are really high as well, but for some reason they seem to be more logical in terms of, we're trying to push for timber construction, let's sit down with the fire brigade and with the insurance to really make this work, and rather than saying, well, this is how we've done it all of our life and we can't change it. So a bit more of a logical approach. However, I do know that in Europe, the flip side of this is there are a lot of grants, there is a lot of financial support in order to push these boundaries and really find out, because as soon as there's one case of a very tall timber building, for example, which we're doing currently in Sydney, as soon as there's one case and another country has done it, and maybe the insurers can learn from each other, or the structural engineers, that's exactly what's pushing the boundaries and how we can really learn from each other and from other cities. And one of the things that we can definitely learn from London, is, I don't know when was the last time you were there, but in terms of these third places, these hotel lobbies that are filled with people that are either just having a drink and you don't know, are they staying there, or are they just, passers-by that really like the vibe? But these hospitality and these curated experience is something that London does really well, and they really draw you in. Doesn't matter if you're there for work or, if you're a tourist.
No, but this is exactly what I wanted to talk about, because what I think when I go to the United States is that I find many of their cities needed curation, and they have a lack of amenities when it comes to many of these smaller cities, not just New York, maybe, but even there, I think these monocultural quarters, they now are at risk, because why should you go there for work if it's only work? And isn't it that the more medieval European mixed quarters cities are something that is more adaptable for the future too? So should we target even more mix or more adaptability in our cities to allow a more humane mix in the cities?
Absolutely. It also, not only just humane, but it's also a different scale. So when you think about, for example, Canary Wharf in London, that was purposely built for just a working city and one type of work. So after 5 p.m. it was pretty dead. So now what they're trying to do is really bring in a mix of schools and children and retail and events that happen on the evenings, so that and you can live very close by. So it's actually quite attractive to live there, even though it's a little bit far away, further from the inner city. But it means that you can live there, you have your own community, you have your supermarket, but you can also work there in the same vicinity. So these smaller communities, and especially the ones that grow more organically and that have the vision of, in 50 years it could really reinvent itself again and be something different because the infrastructure is correct. So I think these smaller cities, and this is why I think we're quite lucky in Europe, because we have more organic and less humongous cities that it takes you an hour to get across from east to west like it is in London. But it's these smaller communities that are more meaningful and grown out of their communities itself.
Interesting. What I found out is when I traveled to Asia, especially China, is that they've, in the first round of building the new cities, they were copying the American high-rise and very centric and monocentric city style, and now they are making a roll back to their traditional, which looks a little bit more European, where it's a little flatter and a little more diverse. Is it also your observation from Australia, similarly?
No, and I haven't been in a while, so I mean, it's not necessarily. I think Australia also, I mean, it has definitely the bigger cities, but the cities, and because it's such a different lifestyle, because it's of the climate is just so different. You see, these communities are much more easier to create because you have so many outdoor spaces and people are gathering outdoors. The boundaries between this is a building and this is outdoor is so much more blurred. In climates where you can leave the doors open and you don't need to worry about moisture or humidity or heat, or in our instance the cold. But I think it's much easier to create these hybrid communities where you don't really know, am I allowed to go in here or am I allowed to pass through, because it's constantly a journey that you can explore for yourself.
So no discussion on any asset class without ESG these days.
Yes.
So we're not talking about E, we're talking about S maybe with you. So is the S part of commercial, of office buildings, all about mixing, or is there something more?
Oh, there's definitely more. I mean, the easiest S for any building owner would be to provide spaces that are not necessarily on just a regular lease. I mean, all of these mixed uses and all of these ideas that we've been talking about really is a challenge for building owners and as well as the tenant advisors and the leasing agents, because it means that they have lots more work to do and lots more risks to take, which is something that obviously is only slowly changing. But we need to be aware that if you maybe create space for a soup kitchen in your building because right now that is what the community needs, it could be something completely different in 2 years' time, and another charity or a kindergarten could move in. So these kind of like flexibility and thinking about from the beginning on, what kind of regulations, what kind of kitchens, what kind of building services might I need, and factoring that in, but also allowing these things to happen, that it can be, quite well off tenancies and A-grade buildings, but there can also be a charity or something that another organization that pays much less rent for this. So this flexibility, which I showed in the diagram, as soon as there's another space available, can somehow can be mixed with another use or with another building tenant, or these things really challenge the traditional way of, we have a 20-year lease for these 10 floors and let's not talk to them anymore. So the whole dialogue, the whole conversation, and the co-creation with your neighbors and with the owners is really quite challenging. But that's the exciting part, I think, for me. And that is it's in the ESG, that's for sure.
Yeah, you said very rightly, there's a lot of work and there's a lot of risk. So your part on talking to the architects and the designers, to the workplace managers, is about a lot of work. So they are now shining. And I'm talking to investors, maybe banks, saying there's more risk. So what do you tell young architects, young designers, how can they prepare to this lot of work and also a lot of risk?
Well, I mean, the architects need to be the ones that convince the owners to take that risk. But one of the things, I know that Germans are more of the risk-averse people. At the end of the day, you just need someone that, takes that risks or allows you to do something. But one of the great German words that I've, that everybody is talking about at the moment is Experimentierfeld. And that is something, it's a whole new world where you can trial and test. And you know what? We can also fail. It's fine. But making these more adaptable spaces and talking to a building owner and say, let's just try it. Let's try it for a year, because otherwise this space will be empty anyway. Let's try and see what happens. Let's give it a limit. Maybe it's only 6 months. And if it fails, we test something else. So this whole trial and test and fail period, I think, is something that Germans are probably not very good at, or maybe grappling with at the moment. But especially also with workplace, let's just try it. Let's see if it works and if people like it, and let's talk about it and start the conversation. And we can always change it back if it's not too much of an investment.
So thank you very much. So we have to experiment, we have to think about it, we have to discuss. So that's all about this forum is about. So thank you very much for your inspirational talk, to your presentation, your insights. And to those who are still with us, so discuss, take risk, and try to do something that hasn't been there before. Experimentierfeld is the word of the day. Thank you very much, Susanne, and have a good day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.